Welcome back. So let's talk a little bit about the theoretical implications of this story. Now again, if this story piques your interest at all, I highly recommend you read the articles. I've given a pretty dense summary of about 20 pages of Merlin Gerin history. But let's talk about how this develops. So again, the Foundry initially aligned with corporate strategy. It produced alloys and things like that for internal Merlin Gerin customers. It made sense to have the Foundry online because Merlin Gerin did not think it was a good idea to outsource anything in the open market. So this was for internal customers. But, once Roger Huet kind of develops his pre-sale product, the demand for Merlin Gerin products externally winds up becoming very, very significant. And so the Foundry no longer exists for internal Merlin Gerin customers, but rather customers in the external market. So they wind up selling their products externally. So the Foundry actually becomes a new internal venture, or entrepreneurship, as we talked about already in this playlist. Then, as the Foundry becomes less and less interested in internal Merlin Gerin customers, especially when it develops products for the defense industry, it winds up just becoming a totally autonomous, standalone business with very little relationship to Merlin Gerin's overall product line. Again, I like to use the big example for 3M. There's very little relationship between the competencies and capabilities of like making cheap razors and cheap pens and making sticky notes. It's just fundamentally different. But the autonomous business was okay, right? And you think about why. Well, first of all, Roger Huet managed to convince the founders that it was okay, and they liked him, so they wanted to keep him around. This guy was really a talented salesman. But more importantly, this business made money. It was self-sustaining. Merlin Gerin didn't really have to invest anything in keeping this autonomous business afloat. It was making a little money off of it. So why not keep it around, right? Wasn't hurting anything to keep it around. And then eventually, once they sell it, and this is where it gets interesting, once they sell the Foundry to Alcoa, and Roger Huet moves into research and development, without that charismatic leader, that charismatic leader of the Foundry becomes uncompetitive and they wind up eventually closing it. Okay? So this is interesting. So there's a few things that I want you to take away from it. So first of all, there's a degree of commitment. Again, Roger Huet was coming from a similar education as the Founder. He kind of embodied the original corporate values, and that's why he was able to make this gradual transition for the Foundry from just being for Alcoa's, Merlin Gerin's internal customers and shifting more towards actually external markets. Okay? So there was kind of a commitment to the Foundry. Again, looking at the technology and market strategies, Merlin Gerin's Foundry winds up developing brand new products for the external market. So that actually is a good thing. It winds up making money for Merlin Gerin. And as I mentioned, Roger Huet was just a charismatic guy. He was able to convince the founders to stay on board with supporting the Foundry, even though McKinsey said don't keep it around. Now here's the thing that you've got to ask. So was it the right decision or not to keep the Foundry on for a full 12 years after McKinsey said, sell the darn thing? Well, the article gives some interesting observations. First of all, when McKinsey said sell the Foundry, it was worth $4 million equivalent, and when they actually did sell it in 81, it was worth $10 million. So you're basically looking at 30% per year increase in value of the Foundry the longer they kept it on. So it's actually a pretty good investment to keep it on based on the fact that they sold it. But I think there's some intangibles that are important. First of all, the Foundry developed Avior and Preciol innovations in steel, and that made Merlin Gerin like this very prestigious company. It gave a lot of acclaim to Merlin Gerin. So that's a good thing. So there's some new innovations. Again, it's a French company. So it made major improvements to French aviation and military industries. That's a huge deal in terms of, if nothing else, for patriotic duty, that kind of argument. They were able to sell these technologies, they were able to export them, and they were able to get royalties from these technologies. So they were able to make money off of that as well. And the one that I think is the most important is, and this is very peculiar to the French context. In France, they have something called CDIs. CDI stands for contract of indefinite duration, lifetime employment. And so layoffs in France are very, very hard to pull off. Okay? In fact, it can be more expensive to lay somebody off or fire somebody than it is to just keep them around not doing anything. Okay, depending on how the union negotiated these contracts. So keeping 300 people employed at Merlin Gerin, even if it wasn't the most profitable way of doing things, was probably cheaper than firing them or laying them off. Okay? And had they sold to a foreign company right away, even though they did eventually sell alcohol, even if they had sold right away, there would have been union negotiations, all sorts of things that would have made it very costly to do this. More importantly, it contributed to Merlin Gerin's sense of a family atmosphere. You think about this. They could have laid off those 300 people working at the Foundry during 2 different recessions in that 12-year period, but they didn't. They kept those people employed, and it gave a tremendous amount of positive PR to Merlin Gerin. So I think this is important to note. I hope you enjoyed this very brief discussion of this case. It's one of my favorites. I hope you do take the time to read it. And as always, give me a thumbs up, that's a like, comment down below, and make sure you subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. And the next video is going to be a very interesting historical French case as well, looking at Taylorism in France and why that didn't work. I'll see you in the next video.